Welcome, everybody, to the Soulpreneur Secrets podcast. And I am absolutely delighted to be hosting Lucy Thom for the second time. We had a podcast a little while ago, didn't we, Lucy,
We
about
did.
creative conversations. But now you come on because you're absolutely bursting to talk about a different topic, which had been very much on my mind as well. So, welcome. And first of all, would you just like to tell people what you do and then fire away?
Sure. Thank you, Deborah. It's so great to be back with you again. And so I am trained in mediation, conflict resolution coaching, and team group facilitation. And I'm also passionate about getting to the root cause of things. So I think symptoms are messengers, and that's in health terms and in society at large. And, rather than, it's good to manage symptoms to begin with. And then I think it's really important to get to the root cause of why they are occurring. So what has been coming up for me just recently is so many women of my kind of age. So I'm early 50s, almost mid 50s, and a bit older, suddenly questioning whether they have ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I think that's what that stands for. And so it was really coming up yesterday. So it's fantastic to get a chance to have a chat with somebody like you, Deborah, because I bet you've got a view on this as well.
So carry on. Tell me what was coming up for you. What was being presented to you?
Well, what was being presented was women going to talks about it. Oh, there's a talk at the community centre, and I think I might go along. I'm wondering if I've got this. And even taking medication. I can't remember. It begins with R. Is it Ritalin? Ritalin. And actually, what this has brought to light for me, and I've been more recently managing to explore my own behaviours, if you like, attitudes, experiences, sufferings and joys since I became a mum, which was almost 19 years ago now. And what I realised is that I've had struggles, and as somebody who you might think of as kind of like high achieving up until that point, if you want to kind of go into labels and categories, I found it really difficult to give myself permission to struggle, and certainly not to admit to it and reach out for help. And so on the one hand, I'm really glad that 19 years on, there are all these women suddenly wondering whether they've got ADHD, and actually we are talking with each other about it. I think that's really healthy. And what I'd like to throw in as a possible option for why we might be having this conversation is that actually we're living in a world run by dysfunctional systems at the moment, very dysfunctional systems, and also a world absolutely filled with distractions, overstimulation, and I think perhaps women deep down, we have a nurturing instinct which is very strong, I believe, in I'm not saying in all women, but in many women, and I'm not saying it's not there in men either, but I'm just focusing on women. And to have a really strong nurturing instinct and then realize just how much of what is thrown our way is so toxic, if you like, poisonous, from how we're educating in mainstream education. So much of it is so undermining of young people. It's so anti-flourishing, where we could be doing things in encouraging, supporting family, supporting community, taking care of the very young, the very old. If people are ill, let's find out what is actually making them ill rather than just medicating and all of that. There's so much dysfunction. And I think potentially we're suffering from cognitive dissonance, not ADHD. I would love to be so at peace with the world, so trusting that of the people, sort of supposedly in charge of our health, in charge of education, running things, that I can feel as though I can just focus on my little area. And you know what? Instead of which, on my list is how many people actually work at the Bank of England, because their one mission apparently is to keep inflation under control. And you look at salaries next to how much it actually costs to feed a family these days or have a roof over one's head in this country, and it's not viable. So all those clever people at the Bank of England, perhaps they're doing something that isn't quite working. That's the kind of thing I'm thinking of. And now, does that make me have ADHD?
So can you go back a little bit to you said you had a lot of conversations yesterday. When did it first sort of strike you that that this thing about older women, because this is my experience as well. I know plenty of young people who say, "Oh, I've got ADHD," but for women of your age and my age, and I'm nearly 15 years older than you, it's a new thing. There were no labels when we were kids.
No, that's it.
You might have been, I hate to use the word, retarded, that you literally, your brain did not function as well as the average person. Or you may have been exceptionally gifted, talented, because you were at the other spectrum. Yeah. But really, that there was, nobody ever spoke about ADHD or autism or anything like that. We just didn't know. I think even dyslexia wasn't even really known about when I was at school. So what's happened for you that suddenly this has sort of popped into your sphere of awareness?
Well, I think, you're absolutely right. Initially, it was young people. And I remember I was in my mid-20s working as a skipper, a yacht captain for the military, actually, at the Joint Services Adventurous Cell Training Centre in Gosport, Portsmouth Harbour. That's quite a mouthful. And I remember some of the conversations there about my older colleagues who had kids, and their kids were being put on medication because they couldn't sit still. And I remember thinking, well, maybe the teacher just needs to let them go and run around the playground for 5 minutes and then come back. How natural is it actually for children to sit still and just listen to endless lessons? I don't know. So I've been aware, and for years I've kind of thought that education is like we're trying to fit children into a format that is not natural. And then instead of looking at the format as the problem, we're looking at the children as having the problems. And to me, that in itself is a really problematic way of approaching the situation. But it's only been in the last maybe month, that I've become more and more aware of this labeling on women in particular and my age group. And it being, of course, with the internet, it's an amazing tool, isn't it? Look at us here now connecting on Zoom. And at the same time, it's interesting how a conversation can quickly, escalate into, gosh, everybody's talking about this. But for me, it wasn't the internet where it was people around me, phone calls with extended family members and local friends were starting. And again, just like I had with the children being labelled as problematic, I was thinking, hang on a minute, I'm sure the problem isn't us. It's not you and it's not me. We need to look at what is being expected of us and under what conditions are we expected to perform these, or fulfill on these expectations. And I think that's where the problem is.
And what's the women, the people who are talking to you, I'm guessing it's mostly women, what sort of things are they describing in terms of why they think this label of ADHD fits?
Well, they're describing things like an inability to really focus on one and complete a task. They're sort of like, and then some forgetfulness, or just when they're doing something, instead of doing something with, being very in the now, they might be thinking about 101 other things. Well, at one point that was being celebrated as, oh, isn't it amazing? That's multitasking. Well, actually, I realise now that was a wolf in sheep's clothing, really. I think that whole, oh, brilliant, you're so good at multitasking, and poor men because they're useless at it. That was being bandied around, wasn't it, in the sort of 90s, I think. Because, of course, when we're doing something, it's really great to give it our whole attention. It's really great to be in that place of inner calm, inner focus, and very conscious of, whatever it is we're doing. So I think it's the noise around us. And by noise, I mean what we can't necessarily put our finger on or don't know very much about, which is I include in that Wi-Fi, like EMF type energy that's, been on the increase ever since radios were first invented. And I think we're reaching a really, quite an intensity now to, just the devices, unless, oh, that reminds me, I'll put mine on silent, so which ping in our pockets and demand our attention. It's kind of like, do you remember the days when it was doctors in hospitals who would have a bleep, and it would be like, gosh, imagine being a doctor with a bleep, because you're that specialist, and if there's somebody in A&E or an intensive care who needs your attention, you can be bleeped. Whereas now we can all be bleeped by myriad people and organizations and websites and, adverts and all these. So, I don't think we've got ADHD, I think.
Well, my theory is that maybe we do all have ADHD, if you want to give it a label, but that actually that is the normal human condition. Because my experience started during lockdown, right at the beginning. So we're talking 4 years ago. And I realized one day I'd gone out to our local, in Manchester, we have this amazing organic cooperative supermarket, vegan supermarket. And I'd gone there to do my shopping. I was staying at a friend's. It was literally a 5-minute walk. And it was gloriously hot, sunny day. And of course, we all had to be 2 meters apart outside. And we were all leaning against this little wooden railing on the edge of the car park. You know, and I was just sitting, you know, just enjoying the sun. You know, it was just so gorgeous, and just, you know, waiting my turn to get in the shop. And I suddenly looked down and I thought, I walked out in my pajamas. I mean,
Brilliant.
they weren't really pajamas, you know, but they were such old rags. And I had become accustomed to just wearing nothing else around the house. And of course, prior to lockdown, I'd be out every day. So I would always make sure I wore something that was fairly presentable. You know, I'd put a face on for the world. And I realized I'd come out without a face. I'd just come out as me.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, and I just felt sort of like, actually, do I care? Actually, I don't really care. I don't care anymore. And this was a huge breakthrough, that I realized I'd been locked up long enough that I didn't care anymore, that I wasn't putting a face on, what we now call a mask.
Yeah. Yeah.
And gradually, you know, I started realizing that I was becoming less and less careful about putting my mask on to be out and about. And then one day I was out somewhere, a couple I'd never met before, and she said to me, "Have you got ADHD?" And I said, "I don't think so." She said, "I think you have. You're just like my husband." And I thought, and then, I don't know, you know, they always say your phone in your pocket picks up on all your conversations and then starts throwing you stuff, you know, that things you might be interested in. I have no idea if that's true or not. I don't really like to go with that. But suddenly the universe said, okay, let's have a look at this. And I started getting a lot of stuff coming through about women, older women with ADHD. I was going on to group chats where, you know, there was one lady, I think she must have been in her late 70s, even early 80s, and she was setting up a new business. She said, "I'm setting up a business for women my age with ADHD." And I was like, whoa, you know, this just was not even heard of, you know. And I thought, this is crazy. How come suddenly there's all these women saying they've got ADHD? And I started having conversations with women that I knew, and young people, no problem. They'll just come up to you, "Yeah, I've got ADHD, you've been diagnosed." But I'm now meeting a lot of women our own age who are going for diagnosis and are being diagnosed with ADHD, or if not autism. And, you know, we've always thought they were perfectly normal people.
Yeah.
And
so do you think there's a stockpile of Ritalin they're trying to get rid of, or what's driving this?
I don't know anybody who's gone onto the medication.
Well, so I do see.
Right, okay. But what it did start me to think about was that, you know, we're adopting these labels, and I think in certain situations, like you say, in school, where every child has to be dealt with in exactly the same way, they've all got to be taught in exactly the same way. So if your brain doesn't fit into that pattern, which I suspect half of them probably don't, then it's quite useful to categorize that child as having a different learning style, whether that's ADHD or autism or whatever you want to call it, dyslexia, and therefore make them something special. So they have to have special help, educational help. As you say, if all education was tailored to each individual child, then we would know that everybody was unique anyway.
Yeah.
But I think what happened, because I remember before lockdown, my son, who is now coming up 24, he had a really lovely little friend who used to come to Glastonbury Festival with us. She was a couple of years older than him. And I never thought anything. I thought she was lovely. I thought she was adorable. She was 16, 17, didn't think anything. And then one day her mother said to me, well, she's an Asperger girl. You're not allowed to say Asperger's anymore because it turned out he was a Nazi supporter. So you have to now say autistic. But
Right.
that's what she said to me. She said, she's an Asperger girl. And she said, but it's hard to tell because girls are really good at masking. Now, I'd never heard that expression, masking, before. And she said, because girls are very good at adapting to conform to the behavior that is expected of them, it's called masking. And she's very good at it. And then, of course, I started realizing that during lockdown, because we were all locked up for so long and we didn't get to interact with the world, we didn't have to mask anymore, that it was long enough for us to get rid of the mask and forget we ever had it. Forget to put it back on again. Because we were on our own for so long. You know, they say it only takes 3 weeks to change a habit. Well, we were 6 months, 2 sessions, you know. And I think a lot of people came out of that and thought, they couldn't even remember what they used to wear anymore.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
know, it's like
It's really interesting. Yeah.
how they behaved anymore. They were now a different person. And although it's weird, because although we were locked up, effectively we were freed. Because within our own homes, we were free to be who we wanted to be, which I think was why we've had so much mental health problems. Because of course, if you're freed, if your natural state is deep depression or anger or whatever, you're going to take that out on your nearest and dearest. You know, it's going to be exacerbated by staying indoors. But for a lot of us, we actually quite liked not having to go out into the world. We actually quite liked that bit of a holiday. And I think enabled a lot of us to take off that mask of respectability, doing what you're told, sitting still and being quiet, all the things that as girls in particular, we were very good at learning when we were little girls.
Yeah. All that
We
condition.
really, all we wanted to do was to please as young women. I just want to please. I just want to be good. I just want to be good. We were always told, weren't we? Girls are good and nice. I just got to be good. I just got to be nice. So I just got to do what's expected of me. I've got to put on the image that's expected of me. I've got to behave as is expected of me. And then suddenly we didn't anymore. And so what I wondered then was, well, take off all those masks, and is the natural human state to actually be what we now call ADHD or neurodiverse? And then I thought, well, actually, that makes complete sense, because as humans, we are so creative. We're supposed to be playing with this, playing with that, playing with this, playing with that. Look at, what happens here? Becoming obsessed with something to the point where we do nothing else for ages because that's our obsession. That's what we're learning about now. And then suddenly you can drop that and become obsessed with something else. And, we have creative minds. And unless we're free to express our minds in the way they naturally want to go, then we are trapped.
Yeah.
We are conforming. And I think that women have always been particularly good at this. I remember at school, it was all right for half of the boys to be naughty, and I went to a grammar school. It was all right for them, they could be caned or whatever. But for girls, that was not.
Yeah.
You just didn't.
Yeah.
I was pretty naughty, but my God, I had to hide it. I had to
Mm.
be so secretive.
Yes. Well, which is exactly what you were saying before, how good girls are at masking and hiding their, our true selves, as a survival mechanism, I guess, protection
Yeah.
mechanism.
And if you think about it, it's been like this, ever since, for hundreds and hundreds of
Mm,
years. If you think about the elite culture, the rich
mm.
people, the women, well, they were in straight jacketed tight dresses. They had to sit absolutely still. Did you ever watch the Titanic film
Oh,
where
yes.
the tea set scene where there's the lady with her little daughter, tiny little thing, sitting at a table. She says, "Now take your tea like this," and we were trained to be so controlled, and
Yeah.
so and I
Well,
think suddenly we're breaking out.
yeah. Well, what I would love to then start, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Number one, let's stop calling it a disorder, because it
Yeah.
ain't a disorder. You could call it a phenomenon. An attention deficit sounds quite negative, doesn't it? So, what about, I would love for us to create a new acronym to replace ADHD. Something positive about just what you were saying, creative.
Genius.
Yeah, genius and energy. We've got energy, haven't we? So energetic, creativity, genius phenomenon, or something like that. What would that give?
And so
EGP.
yeah. So one of the things that, I've really noticed is as a child, I was a really
Mm,
poor reader. Very, very poor. I mean, I've got a PhD, and I was one of the kids that was good at maths and art, which is quite typical of what we call neurodiverse people. Um, and reading, I mean, I'm not dyslexic, I don't think. But I really struggled with reading. I've
mm.
only really just started reading in the last few months, and I can only read novels. I can't read um, fiction, fact, I mean.
Yeah, non-fiction. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing I've noticed is I can barely hold my attention to anything anymore. I really struggle. I'm definitely one of those people now. If I see a video lasts more than 2 minutes, I'm not going to watch it.
Mm,
I don't go on YouTube anymore. I can't watch it anymore. I can't sit. I can't stay long enough with it.
mm.
Um, and that's not like I wasn't like that a year ago. It's definitely increased. And um, what I what I've also been hearing other people saying is that it's almost like in order to focus on something, they have to have something else going on in the background. So
Yeah.
it's like part of their mind is occupied with something else so that they can then actually focus on something.
Yeah.
And I think that's, a little bit like these fidget toys, where, or people, I don't know if you notice nowadays that everybody seems to wear headphones. They're all listening to something,
Yeah.
even if they're going for a beautiful country walk or they're doing the gardening or
Mm,
whatever. It's like they've got to be distracted by something else.
mm,
And I find that if I'm not, then my brain just goes into overdrive.
mm.
It's like, oh, like this, and I'm completely not present.
So
I'm
what?
just
So
off
so.
my brain.
Uh, yeah. Sorry. Go on.
Yeah. So I there's definitely something. I don't know this. I'm not sure whether this has always been like this or whether this is something that we're just starting to become really aware of. That as humans, it's almost like we need multiple things going on around us. I don't know. I don't know. I'm just noticing it in myself. And
Mm.
I'm not the only one. And when I speak to other people, they're experiencing the same things.
So, you know what's coming to me as I listen to you, and I can relate a lot to what you're saying, and that is that going back to this idea of disquiet, I think we can sense, or okay, I'm going to speak for myself. I can sense at a very deep level, and I think it really started when I became a mum. Perhaps there's this unsettledness in us, and by distracting ourselves with, you know, podcasts while we garden and this, that, and the other, you know, that just can sort of help stop our mind going, as you said, you know, your mind goes into overdrive. But it's like, why are our minds, because I don't think that used to be such a phenomenon. I don't think so. I don't.
Or we didn't notice it. I mean,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
one of the reasons why, well, not, it's only possibly a small reason. I don't know how big a reason it is, but you know, with the prevalence of meditation and mindfulness and yoga and all these things. I mean, even, you know, I mean, it goes back, you know, ancient history, Quakers and you know, people who went off into contemplation. I mean, the whole point of all those techniques is to quieten the mind. So I think it has always been known that the mind goes off at a million miles an hour. It's just that it's only being drawn to our attention relatively recently, but actually that is a problem for most of us. And that we would all benefit from practicing meditation and things like that. I think obviously we all need to act on our own responses. You know, that if we feel that, you know, an injustice is being done somewhere and we feel so passionately about it, then I think the only thing we can do is to do something about it. You know, there's no point sitting in an armchair and railing off about some injustice in the world and doing nothing.
Yeah.
That is what makes you sick. Much better to go, I am so angry about this, at least write a letter, or you know, or fill in, you know, some poll or something or other, you know, do something to make your voice known. But I suppose for me, I had you know, it's not very often I get like bits of something come through, what some people call downloads or bits of just information. But something came through this morning for me in my meditation, and it just popped in, and it was about that. You know, I've got this thing about low vibe and high vibe. You know, that we can act at a very low vibration. We're very much operating on our stress hormones. We're in flight or fight mode. We're in survival mode, and it's really actually quite destructive for our bodies to be in that mode for any length of time. Or we can be anywhere in between. You know, it goes through boredom and contentment to sort of peace and bliss and joy and love. You know, and when we're up there, then we're in happy hormones and life looks a lot better. And I was given this information this morning that when we're very self-obsessed with something that is worrying us or making us feel angry, or, you know, not love, you know, when something is in a low vibration emotion, that we are only self-absorbed. We cannot see out into the world. And yet, if we can raise our vibration, then we move out of ourselves and we actually appreciate the beauty, the gratitude of what surrounds us. And I hadn't really occurred to me like that, because one of the things that really strikes me about people who, especially women of our age, who are going, and men who are going off and getting themselves diagnosed, is suddenly they become very self-obsessed about that particular condition.
Mm.
You know, I have friends who, oh, well, yeah, well, I've just, I've been diagnosed as that I'm autistic. Well, that just explains everything. And, and that's the way I am, and and I'm this, and I'm that, and I'm this, and I'm that. And it's like, whoa, okay. I can sort of see that it's useful,
Mm.
if I'm struggling with something, then it can be useful to be told, well, you have a much more creative brain. Your
Yeah.
brain is much more aligned to creative activities. Brilliant. Let's go and do that. But to be told something that we perceive is a problem,
Mm.
and then just to think, oh, well, that's why I'm a problem. I've got a
Yeah.
problem.
It's pretty disempowering, isn't it?
Very disempowering.
And undermining,
Yes,
and
very disempowering. And yet, usually these people are phenomenally creative.
absolutely, absolutely, 100%. So the
Yes,
women who have been telling me that they think they've got ADHD are the kind of women I find really inspiring, actually.
yes,
You know,
because
they're phenomenally energetic, they're dynamos, they are so creative.
and I see that because they have decided they're not going to be the little demure lady drinking her cup of tea, and
Mm,
keeping in her place,
yeah.
and doing what's expected of her.
This is
Maybe
fascinating. This is really fascinating because what is coming to me here is that thanks to, as you say, those strange policies that were imposed on us 4 years ago, um, there has been, there's been some terrible, and in fact, I went and did some mediation. You said, that for some families it was very challenging. And I mean, we're really lucky. We live in a house with a garden, but what if you're in a flat, and with small kids, and so on. So I think the impacts have been pretty wide ranging. But one of the things I was very aware of is the cabin fever, because of course it's something that happens on boats, on long passages. And so when I was hearing about families struggling, I actually did ask the council to give me a permit so that I could, I said, look, I'll only go to their homes if they're all well and I'm well. They wouldn't give me a permit, but I went anyway because that's the person I am. I'm glad to say. And what a phenomenally good thing I did. So because it's interesting that for some people, having, what you were saying about, there's advantages, isn't there, to sort of being in your own home without having to put on a mask, as it were. And there's also huge advantages to having regular interactions with other human beings. And I think, ultimately we are social animals, aren't we? We're pack animals. And so when I just turning up, I'm not at all putting myself on a pedestal. It was just, never mind my mediation skills. It was just me actually walking into their house. There was just this immediate, somebody who somebody new is in our environment. So
yeah.
I do wonder if this kind of quite newly created creative energy that is suddenly being expressed by very many women, and no doubt men as well, needs to be seen as problematic.
So it needs to be seen as problematic.
Yeah, because for the authorities, just like schools see, you know, very often, I'm not saying all schools, but in very many schools, and I mean, the teachers are under enormous pressure. Everything's measured from such a young age now. So, you know, I'm not pointing the finger at people. I do think it is the system and the systems. But, you know, it's quite problematic to potentially have women of our age, because one of the great things about getting older, I'm discovering, is that you start to actually not, you know, well, to be much more carefree. And then it's like we're on carefree, you know, times 1,000 because of that recent, oh, this is who I really am. You know, this is what really matters in life. I think there's a lot of that going on as well. And
so it's not
with,
ADHD, it's just growing old.
Yeah, growing old and realizing who we're really meant to be, you know, and giving ourselves permission to be who we are really here to be.
Yeah.
You know, instead of this conforming and so on. But if you are an authority, or you're trying to be an authority over others, you know, it's much easier, isn't it, to have a class full of conforming teachers. It's much easier to have a society made up of people who just conform to whatever you say.
And astrologically, it's quite interesting because lockdown coincided with a big group of planets landing on top of each other in Capricorn, including Pluto. And Pluto had been in Capricorn since 2008, when we had the financial crash. And Pluto's very much about top-down authority, like you were just saying. That's what you want in a classroom, top-down authority. And of course, last year, Pluto moved into Aquarius for a few months, went back into Capricorn. This year, it's in Aquarius now, but it goes back into Capricorn in the autumn. So we need to expect that things could look like they're going backwards in the autumn. We could suddenly go, oh my God, we're back to where we were. Oh no, but it's only temporary. By the end of the year, we'll be back into Aquarius for good. Now, Aquarius is much more grassroots level up. So when you said earlier that how can one person make a difference, it is only individuals that can make a difference. Top down is finished.
Absolutely.
It is only grassroots up that now makes a difference. So it is really important that each one of us individually lives our truth and lives our authentic self, because that is what will then create the changes. So we do have all the power as individuals now. And what I really like is that in astrology, we always look at the opposite sign as well. What is it about the opposite sign that has to be integrated? So the opposite of Capricorn, where Pluto was, is Cancer, which is all about care. So this top-down authority was on the basis that this is how we will care for everybody equally. Everybody's going to get exactly the same.
I'm going to add allegedly. Yes.
Allegedly, yes. But the intention was everybody's going to get exactly the same. Yeah. You know, every child in the classroom gets exactly the same education, exactly the same treatment, etc. It's this, and also, you know, Cancer is about this caring, nurturing, you know, usually a feminine type of role. And, you know, that's what we, you know, blah, blah, blah. Whereas now we're in Aquarius, the opposite is Leo. And Leo is about self-identity. It's about our sovereignty. It's about each of us recognizing that we are a sovereign being. We all are. Every single one of us is a sovereign being, is a unique sovereign being. And once we start to really grasp that as a culture, as a world, or even as an individual, then I think we'll see that we actually give people permission then. It's that old saying of Marianne Williamson, that it's not our dark that we're afraid of, it's our light that we are
Mm.
afraid of.
Yeah.
But when we can come out and display our light, which I think is what lockdown enabled so many of us to do, was to come out and say, "Oh God, you just have to take me as I am because I ain't getting dressed up again." Um,
Mm.
I'm displaying my light. I'm displaying who I am. That then gives permission for other people to do the same.
Yeah. Yeah. So
So
that's interesting, that what I'm hearing and what you're saying there from the astrological side of things is that whilst there is this Pluto energy going on, which is very top down, at the same time,
in
I'm hearing,
Capricorn, it was.
yes, in Capricorn, at the same time, there's this real invitation for us to recognize ourselves as sovereign, radically unique beings
Yeah,
here, each of us to contribute to the whole,
yeah,
um, in our own individual ways.
yeah. And the Dalai Lama said that in this transition that we're going through now, because I believe that we're going through a huge evolutionary transition. I mean, just all the solar flares we've been
Mm,
having,
mm,
and this aurora, which I sadly didn't see, but it's like the planet is being bombarded with radiation,
mm,
absolutely bombarded in a way that we do not recognize having happened for a very long time.
mm.
And so I believe that we are going through some sort of shift. And the Dalai Lama said it will be middle-aged women who will save this planet.
Mm,
Now, so think about it.
mm,
Maybe it's got nothing to do with ADHD, nothing. Maybe it's just the fact that women, as they get older, traditionally always become less conservative.
mm.
That old thing, well, I'm going to wear a red dress and a purple hat and I don't care.
Yeah, yeah,
That sort of Vivian Westwood, and these incredible women who just they're punks.
yeah,
They're
yeah,
punks in their 80s, and maybe that that impetus, that drive to break out of our shells, which I think women have always had to some
mm,
extent.
mm.
Maybe it's just been exaggerated massively. Maybe it's like it's we've been given the freedom, 4 years locked up. Yeah, do whatever you like. Come out,
Yeah,
break those, get rid of those masks. We don't need them anymore indoors. And then just come out and be the woman who wears a red dress and a purple hat.
mm,
And it is really interesting to hang out with other women, of old mature years, and to see how different they are compared to how women of old mature years were, for example, when we were children,
yeah, yeah, for sure.
who were still very much had to, wear their twin set and pearls and do what they were told
Mm,
and behave in a certain way.
yeah,
And I mean, I even had a bit of a thing the other day about, you know, I just know so many women of my age who, sorry, I've got a little beastie on my arm, who are just desperate for a partner. They're single and they're desperate for somebody. And I'm like, what? Why do we have this desperation about it?
mm,
And then I thought, of course, it's only 100 years ago that women did not have a voice in the world
mm,
except
mm.
through their husbands.
Yeah, yeah,
My mother, when I was in my 30s, my mother said, I can't do anything. I can't go and do anything. I can't go anywhere. I can't do my own life because until I know that you are being looked after by a man. That's what she said to me.
Wow.
So
Okay.
that is still so much in
Yeah,
our
sort of
cultural consciousness
collective psyche. Yeah.
that we have to be looked after by a man.
Mm.
And I think suddenly a lot of women are like, well, I don't. And in fact, honestly, this is a great story. I was at the bus station the other day, just local bus station, and there was a tiny, very diminutive little woman,
Mm.
and she looked quite young from the back, but then I saw her hands, and I thought, whoa, she's actually quite elderly, and she had all her walking gear on, with a little
Mm.
rucksack and a walking pole and a little suitcase, and I thought, oh, she's obviously been on a walking holiday. So I said to her, have you been somewhere nice? Have you had a good time? And she said, oh, I've had a great time. I said, where did you go? She said, oh, I don't know. I can't remember. And then she spent ages. I thought she'd forgotten about me. Spent ages rooting through her bag, all tickets and bits of paper. Eventually, she brought a piece of handwritten paper to me. She said, that's where I've been. And it was a list of all the places she'd had to change on public transport. There was a long list. And at the top, the Isle of Wight. She could not remember that that was where she had been.
Wow.
And yet, on her own, she had the confidence to travel all the way down to the Isle of Wight and go on a walking holiday.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
yet her brain was already losing the plot a little bit, and that she couldn't remember where she'd been. And I was like, I don't personally know of a man who would have done that. And I also definitely don't know of couples who would do that.
Yeah.
And it really said something to me about how, how courageous this woman was. And for her, it was just an ordinary thing to do.
Yes. Yeah.
And
And that,
I think women, like the Dalai Lama said, we are going to be the ones who save the world. We are stepping into our power. And I think that involves a lot of unmasking and a lot of liberating. But I don't personally, I don't think it helps for us to then all go and get, well, I've got ADHD, I've got a problem.
exactly. So how about, and the next woman who says to me, oh, I think I might have ADHD, I'm going to say, oh, really? Because haven't you heard of ECGP? You might just be ECGP. Oh, no, I've not heard of that. What's ECGP? I'm going to say, you're just an energetic creative genius. And they've put phenomenon on the end because they've only just realized that that's who we all really are. Energetic creative geniuses. How's that?
Right, EGCP. Energetic creative.
ECGP is the phenomenon. Energetic creative genius phenomenon. That makes it sound like
Energetic creative genius phenomenon. I am an energetic creative genius phenomenon. Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. That sounds like a really good place to finish.
And it certainly doesn't need any medication, any concerns. I wouldn't call that a disorder, would you? Hurrah. Thank you so much, Deborah.
Awesome. Oh, lovely. Always great to have conversations with you. It's like always like something new pops out.
Yes.
That's
well, it certainly did today, didn't it?
That's what it's all about. And the sun has come out too.
Yeah, all right. Here as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lucy.
Thank you, Deborah.
Yeah,
really
look forward to talking again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely.